Good evening, and welcome to another World of Warships video by Captain Darkwing Glacier. This video is going to be a long rant about how the game is crap, my teammates are always crap, every ship except the one I'm currently using is overpowered, radar is overpowered, unless the ship I have has it, and how all the problems with this game is someone else's fault, because none of it could possibly be my fault. Well, not really, but I am going to talk about Salt. The gameplay in the background is a random battle in my Tier 5 premium American battleship, the Texas. The gameplay itself is kind of unremarkable, or rather, it's not a very good game. In fact, it's a pretty bad game. Why? Because I spent half the game arguing in chat rather than paying attention to the battle. I really should know better than that by now. So, what happened in this battle? Well, each team has a single destroyer, and our destroyer captain in a Tier 6 German destroyer, the Gade, decided to charge into a capture point Charlie and was outspotted by the enemy destroyer and promptly focused and killed by the other team. The captain, feeling rageful, began trash-talking the game in chat, complaining that it was unfair for him to be outspotted and killed. It should be noted that he is in a Gade, which is tied for second place with the Farragut as having the worst detection out of all the Tier 6 destroyers, of which there are currently 13. So it's hardly a surprise that he was outspotted. Anyway, in response to his ranting, I suggested maybe he quit the game if he hated it so much. He replied by telling me to shut up and calling me a bag of excrement, in French. And down the rabbit hole we went. Of course, my mistake was responding to him in the first place. If no one had answered him, and wisely no one else on my team did, then he probably might have ranted a little bit longer, then gotten bored and gone quiet. World of Warships is by no means the worst game out there when it comes to salt and toxicity in chat, but it does have a fair share of it. First, a funny story. I don't play a lot of online multiplayer games, or at least I hadn't in a long time prior to World of Warships, so I'm not always up to date on the latest lingo. So to me, if someone was being salty, it meant that they were using foul language. Seeing as the word is also naval slang, it fit well with World of Warships, so that's what I assumed it meant. But I soon found out that in the context of online gaming in general, salt means something else, so I will share with you my wisdom. There are many kinds of salt you will experience, but the most common is sodium chloride, represented by the chemical formula NaCl. It is an ionic compound that in a solid state forms an isometric crystal consisting of two interpenetrating face-centered cubic lattices, with the chloride cations forming the primary structure and the sodium anions forming the secondary structure within the primary's regular octahedral voids, similar to almost all other alkali halides. Another kind of salt you might run into is the whining of players, the word implying that the player is shedding tears in their indignant rage. Human tears contain the following compounds, but are mostly made of water and salt. The game in the background here is a good example, as it contains many of the different varieties of salt, the first kind being this type of salt is caused by someone who quickly gets themselves into a tight spot and is promptly focused by the enemy, one-shot by an enemy battleship, or annihilated by a torpedo salvo from a destroyer they never even saw. They then complain that the reason that this happened is that the game is somehow unfair. Their ship is underpowered, or the enemy ships are overpowered, or the game mechanics are conspiring against them. Whatever it is, it's not bad luck, and it's certainly not their fault. A similar complaint to this one is, although it can happen to anyone, this kind of salt is mostly, but not always, attributable to destroyer players. The situation tends to be that a player advances ahead of, or in some cases is isolated from, the rest of the team and is focused and sunk. Thus the complaint is lack of support from teammates. This can also happen later in the game when a player tells the team to push, and he does, only for no one to follow. This recently happened to me. Here I am in my Richelieu in a Tier 10 game on Tears of the Desert. We started out in the southwest spawn, and the entire team headed east. I was towards the rear of the pack, and as I got close I saw we had a numbers advantage on this flank. So I plowed past the rest of the team and charged the enemy. I exhorted my team to follow in the hopes of us wiping out the enemy on that flank. Of course, no one followed me, they stayed back, and I died. Annoyed, I blamed the team in chat for not following. But as it turned out, we were already ahead and ended up winning the game. I'd like to think that my heroic sacrifice disrupted the enemy plan, allowing my teammates to kill them more easily, but just as likely not. In my defense, after my initial whining, I shut up and I watched the rest of the game. No one engaged with me anyway, which is probably a good thing. So I was a little salty. But at least I'm not a... Another common form of salt is denigrating players who play premium ships. Apparently, and this is before my time, when the Tirpitz was released, many players who were otherwise new to the game bought the premium Tier 8 battleship, leaping up the tech tree like the little upstarts they were. Tier 8 games, so the story goes, became flooded with players unfamiliar with the Tier 8 meta. That is, things like hydroacoustic search, the longer gun ranges, higher speed ships, more effective secondary batteries, and so on. These players, these wallet warriors, were ruining the game for the players who had earned their way up to Tier 8 by their dedicated grinding. The Tirpitz earned the name Dirpitz for enabling the wallet warriors and lowering the level of play at higher tiers. It is true that some premium ships are overpowered, but the truth is, most, if not all of them, are not so overpowered as to be game-breaking. But a belief does persist among some players that buying premiums is cheating. Or, failing that it's a sign of a lazy player who wants to pay to win, or a sucker. I mean, seriously, you're gonna pay Wargaming and thereby supporting the game's development when the game is free to play, or even pay to win? You must be so proud of yourself. This came up in a game playing in the background here. My salty adversary told me, in French, to continue to pay for my stats in pixels, along with some name-calling as well. I responded by correcting his French spelling, so he switched to English and told me to ask my mother to buy me another premium ship. Not that it mattered, I replied by saying that I didn't buy the Texas. I got it by completing the Twitch Prime promo missions. He called me a liar. This stupidity went back and forth for a while, and regardless of whoever was winning the argument, the fact was I was spending more time typing at him than playing the game. He was already dead at this point, so it didn't matter to him, but it did affect me because it was distracting me. It also affected the team because it was cluttering up chat, and my distracted play was hurting the team's chances of winning. So I was foolish for engaging him at all. Okay. To get back on track, some of the animosity towards premium ships comes from the idea that spending money on a so-called pixel ship is a waste, since you don't get a physical object in return for your money. Well, as with all video games, you're not paying for a physical object. Most games these days are downloads, so when you buy a game, you're not buying a physical product. What you're paying for is an experience. You're paying to be entertained for a few hours, give or take, depending on what game it is. To some people, experiences in entertainment have value that is worth money. So mocking someone for buying a pixel ship has no merit and merely exposes the mocker for not understanding the business model of video games. None of this, of course, is to mock people who don't pay money for in-game benefits. Just as players who spend money support the development of the game, players who don't spend money support the game by increasing the pool of players available for multiplayer games. There's no need for members of one group to look down upon those in the other. Members of both groups are enhancing the experience for everyone. Another common form of salt is stat shaming. That is to say, player 1 has something against player 2, looks up his game stats, and assuming that those stats aren't stellar, mocks player 2 for having poor stats. World of Warships has a decent-sized player base. There are those who play it religiously and those who play it casually. There are players of high skill and players of low skill. But regardless of their skill level or how often they play, they all contribute to the health and continued survival of the game. Stats are often of interest to players interested in examining their performance, and they may take some pride in how their stats compare to the community as a whole. To a player who thrives on competition or needs a sense of validation, stats are vitally important. A more casual player probably couldn't care less about their stats, or anyone else's for that matter. I should note that I'm not saying that all competitive players have a need to feel validated and vice versa, but there can be some overlap there. In any event, there's nothing wrong with caring about your stats or not caring about them. But using a player's stats to call them out for being a poor player is just a petty attempt at asserting dominance. It might make such accusers feel better about themselves, but it also outs them as wanting to appear superior because, well, they're not. I'm not entirely innocent, however. I have on occasion looked up another player's stats, and I have, rarely, mentioned that another player's stats might not be so great. But I do have a rationalization that will surely exonerate me from any charges of hypocrisy and show me to be a model player. Many times I have been the subject of abuse from salty players. If they are harassing me and just won't let it go, then and only then is there a possibility that I will look up their stats. The game in the background is an example of my misbehavior. Thoroughly annoyed with my adversary after I was sunk, I looked up his stats, and I couldn't help but mention that they weren't exactly amazing. So, my admittedly weak defense is that although I have been known to stat shame, I only do it in retaliation for out-of-control assault on the part of someone harassing me. The most petty version of salt is name-calling. As everyone knows, when someone resorts to name-calling, it means that they have no argument. If you did have an argument, you'd use it. In this game, for example, the guy complained about the game, I suggested he quit, and for that, I was called a shitbag, an asshole, a stupid kid, a piece of shit, a liar, a loser, a premium noob, a stupid idiot, a dumb, an idiot, a coward, and a stupid dumb. I suppose it could have been worse. I mean, he could have said,
"Oh yeah, well, hyperbolic paraboloid, yo mama."
Again, I admit I'm guilty of name-calling, at least in the game in the background, but I only did it once, and that was to repeat back a name that I was called. Calling someone a stupid dumb isn't exactly good English. I know, I shouldn't mock someone's command of English if they aren't a native speaker, especially seeing as I can only speak one language myself. But come on, this guy deserved it. Seriously though, everyone can get frustrated with the game, but if you feel the urge to start calling other players names, maybe it's time for you to take a break and come back when you can play nice. So, how do we do that? So after listing multiple kinds of salt, how do you fight it? Or better yet, prevent it in the first place? Some people say, I don't even look at chat. Well, if this works for you, then go for it. I keep chat on for teamwork purposes, and also so I can congratulate team members when they do something good. I think you should go out of your way to compliment team members, for it can act as a counterweight to the toxic trash that can fill up chat. One of the things I do try to do is to encourage banter across teams. If you say something silly in chat, it lightens the mood, and all of a sudden everyone isn't taking the game so seriously anymore, and the chance for salt decreases. Of course, this doesn't always work. At the beginning of one game, being in a French ship, I posted in chat, "I will sink you with the stink of French cheese." Not the funniest statement in the world, but it got a response from a player on the other team who replied, "Hola." Somehow this triggered a player on my team who apparently believed I was speaking in code with a friend on the other team, and we were plotting his demise. It sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, and that this guy must have been a troll, but based on the curse-filled rant he unleashed before the game really even started, it seemed like this guy needed some therapy. When it comes to players doing something dumb and angering you, remember that even the best players have been known to make mistakes and to have bad games. Some Unicum players have even been known to run aground occasionally. I've been team killed a few times, and sometimes the player who did it was apologetic, sometimes not. If they are apologetic, I don't get angry. Sometimes I even compliment them for owning their mistake. When they aren't, and especially if they blame the TK on me, I'll report them for unsportsmanlike behavior. Ultimately, this is a game, and very few things in it are worth getting salty over. Just a few days ago, I saw a thread on a popular World of Warships Facebook group where a player was bragging about how he had been banned from chat for his behavior. Several of his cronies jumped on board, just declaring their saltiness towards other players as a point of pride. A few others pushed back, but the original player was unapologetic. He said that his personal way to vent frustration was to cuss out other players. If they didn't like it, well, then they were just fragile snowflakes. Sounds like a case of projection to me. If you have such little self-control that the only way to salve your bruised ego over a game is to abuse other people, then you are a small person. In my opinion, being a good player is more than just your stats. It applies also to your attitude and your contribution. Good players don't need to bully other players, brag about their stats, name call, or go off on profanity-laced rants. Why? Because good players don't have to prove anything. Well, that's pretty much my take on Salt. I know that some players will agree with my take and others will not. But either way, the bottom line is this. Let's try to make this game a fun experience for everyone, not just yourself. Thanks for watching.